Chapter 178 Masked Moon Sect. Han Li was moved after hearing the reward. He knew clearly that on the path of cultivation, he could definitely go through less trouble if a master could guide and point him in the right direction. This would benefit his cultivation. But at the same time, this martial ancestor Li was definitely not someone he could lie to easily. Han Li had plenty of secrets himself, and if he was in contact with him for too long, Han Li was afraid that he would sense that something was wrong. If martial ancestor Li questioned him, it would be Han Li seeking his own death. Moreover, hearing those pieces of advice he gave earlier, this person must not be someone who cherished the relationship between a master and a disciple. He would most likely use the discipleship to have others prey on the weak and kill for the treasure. After thinking about it carefully, Han Li's somewhat enticed mind calmed down right away. The other Yellow Maple Valley disciples didn't have these kinds of misgivings. They were each rubbing their palms as their morale rose greatly. Now they not only had to battle for their survival, but they also had to fight for their own future. Han Li unconsciously took a look at junior martial sister Chen and saw her blushed cheeks, her fists that were held tightly, and her shining eyes. It looked like she had made her decision. Han Li sighed to himself and didn't bother to keep paying attention to other people from the Yellow Maple Valley. Instead he looked towards the Clear Void sect. That Taoist priest was shooting off his mouth to the people of the sect. He acted very excited from time to time and made those young Taoist priests cheer each time. Each one of them was excited. It seemed like the brainwashing was successful. Of course, there were also some elder Taoist priests whose expressions remained calm all along, not affected whatsoever. Just as Han Li thought it was interesting and was enjoying it, someone suddenly yelled, "Look! The people from the Masked Moon Sect are here. It's the Heavenly Divine Moon Boat." Hearing this, Han Li was stunned and looked up into the sky. A small bright, white dot was shining in the sky, slowly approaching. Its speed was extremely fast. No long after, it was in the sky above the mountain. It was actually an enormous ship sculpted from green jade. Outside the wall of the ship was a delicate drawing of a dragon and a phoenix, making the ship seem extremely luxurious. There was even an incredibly large white shield surrounding the ship. The ship was filled with a large crowd, half of them men and the other half women, all of whom were clad in white. The one leader was an attractive young woman who was well dressed. Each of her movements was amorous and stirred people's souls. After this woman got off from the jade ship and removed the white shield, she opened her almond-shaped lips lightly and said, "To martial brothers, martial Uncle Chong, here is Ni Chang's greetings." Martial ancestor Li and the Taoist priest couldn't dare to keep her waiting and immediately returned the courtesy. On the other hand, that senior Chong grinned on contrary, when suddenly his figure became blurry. He disappeared into the air, leaving a sentence and some prideful yet strange laughter. 7 days from now, I will come back here. Prepare the wager beforehand. This time I will surely win. The Taoist priest and martial ancestor Li looked at each other. They didn't know why this old man had such confidence. They checked earlier, and even though the Masked Moon Sect's disciples were indeed stronger than their two sects, there was no reason to boast. The young woman's beautiful eyes looked around, and she asked out of curiosity. After finding out the details of the bet, she couldn't help but laugh. Her laughter could shake a flower's branches and suck in people's hearts and souls. That young woman's flirtatious manner made many of the young male disciples from the three sects stare blatantly and almost drool. But the Taoist priest and martial ancestor Li couldn't care about the wonderful scene in front of them since both of their hearts just dropped. They felt like they had walked into a trap, and their faces couldn't help but become bitter. Was it possible that the Masked Moon Sect had some kind of trump card prepared for this trip that could suppress both of the sects? The two of them controlled themselves. Even though they felt gloomy about this, they felt embarrassed to directly ask the young woman for the whole story. As for the beautiful young woman, Celestial Ni Chang, she naturally pretended not to know about it and took pleasure in doing so. She led the conversation away and started chatting about some other interesting things. The sight of Han Li and the other male disciples from Yellow Maple Valley had already focused onto the large crowd of female disciples that just arrived. They had previously heard that the Masked Moon Sect promoted pair cultivation techniques, so at least half of the recruited disciples were females, and they absolutely did not accept below-average appearances. Now seeing it for themselves, the female disciples' reputation was really well deserved. This group of women were each ravishingly beautiful, as fair as a flower, and gorgeous like the moon. Watching them made them keep drooling, their minds running wild. Han Li was slightly better off. Although for a moment he feasted his eyes, with his outstanding willpower he was quickly able to restrain his mind and calm his heart. That was when he realized that the female disciples from the Masked Moon Sect seemed to be used to being watched by so many people at the same time. Their expression didn't change as they chatted among themselves freely. Some of them even winked a few times towards the people who were watching them, making those spectators lose strength in their legs and have butterflies in their stomachs without knowing what to make of it. But the male disciples' reactions were exactly the opposite. Each of their eyes showed anger. They especially cared of the young girls beside them, so they furiously returned the gaze of everyone who was staring. Han Li smiled softly. He understood just by looking at the men and women standing together in pairs that even if these pairs were not really couples, they must be pairs that had been arranged for cultivation. That was why the male disciples were so furious. They probably already saw the person beside them as their private property, even if the female disciples didn't think the same way. Strangely, Han Li noticed that the male disciples were staring not only at the Yellow Maple Valley's disciples, but also toward the people from the Clear Void Sect. Under his curiosity, he turned his head and saw that the small and vigorous Taoist priests were indeed peeking at the young girls from time to time and then immediately turned their sight away, as if they were afraid of being caught in their act. They seemed extremely sneaky. Han Li tried to press down the hilarious feeling in his heart, afraid that he would actually laugh out loud. Although he wasn't sure whether he got the right impression, Han Li kept having the feeling that the female disciples from the Masked Moon Sect were giving more flirtatious winks to the small Taoist priests than to the Yellow Maple Valley side. This left him speechless for a while. But when he thought better of it, Han Li felt dreadful in his heart. These disciples did not come here to flirt but rather for a battle of survival. If each of the sect's young disciples went up against the Masked Moon Sect's female disciples, Han Li was afraid that they would lose a third of the battle even before the fight started. After all, not everyone would be able to directly take down these beautiful women. But what puzzled Han Li even more was that the disciples from the Masked Moon Sect, regardless of whether they were either a man or a woman, they were all very young. Not one of them was old, which didn't make sense. If someone were to say that some of these people were actually old monsters that possessed eternal youth, Han Li would absolutely not believe it. Watching their flirtatious actions, they were at most about 20 years old, and there were no signs of aging on their figures. But since this trial by blood and fire was known as a suicidal trip, it was impossible for so many young people to come here to die on their own volition. Even if that were the case, it was impossible for them to come in so many pairs. Han Li would die before he believed that their relationships were all so deep that they could live and die together. Both the Yellow Maple Valley and the Clear Void Sect had some elderly figures in their lineup. Because their time was almost up, even if they didn't participate in this trip to the Forbidden Area, they wouldn't live long. Therefore they vainly attempted to make a last-ditch effort. If they could successfully obtain the Foundation Establishment pill and then luckily enter Foundation Establishment, their fate would be completely different. Even though there would definitely be no hope of cultivating to core formation, it would still be a gain to be able to live for another 100 years. Even though there weren't that many old folks with these thoughts who came to participate in the trial by blood and fire, there was still a total of 7 or 8 from the two sects, and yet the Masked Moon Sect didn't have any. This was a bit strange in Han Li's eyes. Martial Ancestor Li and the Taoist priests seemed to have realized that something was wrong, and their faces darkened even more. Even though they were still chatting with Celestial Ni Chang from the Masked Moon Sect, anyone could tell that they have drifted off in their minds. Shortly after, the rest of the 4 sects all arrived one by one. The ones who left the biggest impression on Han Li were the ones from the Giant Sword Sect and the Spirit Beast Mountain. Everyone from the Giant Sword Sect was male. They were all dressed in black, each with a giant, sheathless sword on their backs. With extremely cold expressions on their faces, they each gave off a murderous spirit. The people from the Spirit Beast Mountain were dressed in very colorful and flashy clothing, wearing all kinds of leather with numerous pockets. There even seemed to be living creatures moving around in their clothes. This frightened the disciples from the other sects to no end. As for the people from the Saber Transformation Dock and the Heavenly Imperial Fortress, aside from how they each dressed, they were at least considered normal people in Han Li's eyes. They were like the Yellow Maple Valley's disciples, and many of them were whispering with nervous faces.